From the outside looking in, folks probably thought we were the perfect couple. I'm the kind of guy who likes things neat and orderly, sticking to routines, with discipline and predictability. I've never been one to waste time getting caught up in unnecessary emotions. My life was all about work, and I lived by logic and reason, expecting the same from everyone around me, especially my wife. At first glance, you'd probably wonder how we ever ended up together. She was the opposite of me, more outgoing, spontaneous, and she didn't care for the rules I followed. She thrived on chaos and unpredictability. But even with those differences, we had a lot in common where it counted. We were both laser-focused on our careers. Neither of us got tangled up in the romantic fluff I always found kind of pointless, and she respected that about me. We worked well together, or at least, that's what I thought at the time. What really drew me to her was that she wasn't clingy. She had her own life, her own dreams, and she didn't expect me to be constantly showering her with affection. We gave each other space, and that balance worked perfectly for us. It felt like we had an unspoken understanding. We didn't need to be the couple glued to each other's side all the time, and we were good with that. But now, looking back, I realize how blind I was to the little things. There was always something about her independence that I admired, and it never crossed my mind to question her loyalty. Why would I? We had boundaries set, and I thought those were rock solid. I figured as long as we stuck to the plan, everything would be fine. For me, it was all about keeping things practical and simple. But as I've come to learn, just because things seem steady on the outside doesn't mean they actually are. Before I go any further, there's something big I need to mention. It's a decision I made a long time ago, one that seemed like no big deal at the time, but it ended up playing a massive role in everything that followed. I got a vasectomy. I never wanted kids. The idea of raising children never sat right with me. I was too wrapped up in my career and didn't have the patience or desire for a family. My wife, Jessica, well, back then, she was on the same page. She didn't want kids either, or at least that's what she said. We had that talk early on, and she seemed relieved when I brought it up. She wasn't one to daydream about being a mom. Like me, she was all about her career and didn't want anything holding her back. So, when I got the vasectomy, it felt like a no-brainer. No kids, no complications, just the two of us living the lives we'd planned. It made things simpler. No more worrying about accidents or surprises. We could focus on what we cared about, our work, our ambitions, and keeping life on track. At the time, I thought it was the perfect decision. It made sense, and it felt like a logical step to make sure our lives stayed the way we wanted, simple and straightforward. We didn't talk about kids after that. We didn't need to. Our routine stayed the same, and we moved on like nothing had changed. I didn't realize how much that one small decision would come back to haunt me later. Our lives settled into a rhythm that seemed to suit both of us. I worked from home, being in IT, and Jessica had a demanding career that often kept her at the office late. That simple, predictable life worked for me. I figured it worked for her too. But looking back, there's something else I should mention. After the vasectomy, we stopped using condoms. It didn't seem necessary anymore. No worries about pregnancy, no added stress. For us, it was just another convenience, another thing that made our relationship seem easier than most. And honestly, it brought us closer. Without condoms, things felt different, more real, more intimate. We both liked that extra closeness, and after a while, it just became our new normal. Years went by, and life kept moving forward without much in the way of surprises. We were both busy with work, and our routine didn't really change. But now, looking back, I realize I missed a lot of small signs. Little shifts in her behavior that, at the time, I brushed off. When you live with someone for so long, you get used to their habits, and it's easy to overlook things that might have seemed odd early on. I thought routine meant stability, but I was dead wrong. It started small. Jessica began coming home later than usual. At first, it was just an hour or two here and there, and I didn't give it much thought. We both had busy jobs, and I knew how easy it was to get stuck in a late meeting or wrapped up in a last-minute project. But then, the late nights started happening more often. A couple times a week, she'd come home long after her usual time. At first, I didn't really notice anything. But once it became a regular thing, I had to ask. One evening while we were having dinner, I casually brought it up, not trying to accuse her of anything, just curious. "What's been keeping you at work so late?" I still trusted her completely back then, so it wasn't a big deal to me. Her answer seemed innocent enough. She explained that her team had started doing some after-hours team-building stuff. "We work long hours together," she said, "but we don't really know each other. So a few of us started going out for drinks a couple of times a week to relax and bond." It sounded reasonable. I knew how stressful her job could be, and if she needed to unwind with her coworkers, I wasn't going to stand in her way. Why would I? I trusted her. We'd been together for years, and I had never had a reason to doubt her. Besides, she always came home, maybe a little tipsy at times, but nothing out of the ordinary. I didn't give it much thought and went back to focusing on my work, thinking everything was fine. But those late nights became a regular thing. And after a while, I began to notice some small changes, things that didn't sit right with me. It wasn't just the late hours. It was how she acted when she finally got home. She seemed distant, like her mind was somewhere else. And still, I didn't push her on it. I didn't want to be that overbearing husband questioning every move his wife made, so I let it go. I convinced myself it was just work stress. After all, I had my own projects to worry about, and I didn't want to stir up drama when I didn't think it was necessary. But then, one night, everything shifted. She came home late again, but this time she was completely hammered. I'm talking stumbling through the door, slurring her words, barely able to walk straight. Her clothes were a mess, hair all over the place, and she didn't even know where her purse was. This wasn't like her at all. She usually kept herself together, even after a few drinks. But that night, something was off. I helped her to the bedroom, trying to stay calm, though I had this gnawing feeling that something was seriously wrong. As we were walking, I spotted something on the floor near the doorway. At first, I couldn't tell what it was, but when I bent down to pick it up, my stomach dropped. It was a used condom. I froze, just staring at it, trying to wrap my head around what I was seeing. My brain went into overdrive, scrambling to make sense of it, but there was no other explanation. I looked at her, passed out on the bed, completely unaware of the bomb that had just gone off in my head. All the late nights, the drinking, those weak excuses about team building, suddenly clicked into place. She'd been cheating on me. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I stood there, staring at that condom, unable to believe it. How long had this been going on? Who was she with? Was it one guy, or had this become a regular thing? My thoughts spiraled out of control as I stood frozen with rage and confusion. I wanted to wake her up right then and demand an explanation, but what could she possibly say that would fix this? The proof was right there in my hand. I tossed the condom to the floor, disgusted, and stepped back, trying to catch my breath. My heart was pounding, and my hands were shaking. I've always prided myself on keeping my emotions in check, but in that moment, I felt like I was about to explode. How could she do this? After all the years we'd been together, after everything we'd built, how could she betray me like this? I stormed out of the bedroom, trying to calm down, but the anger just kept building. All those nights she came home late, all the times she brushed me off with some lame excuse, I had believed her. I had trusted her completely. And this whole time, she'd been sneaking around behind my back, making a fool out of me. I couldn't handle it. I paced around the house for what felt like hours, replaying everything in my head. The signs had been there, but I'd been too blind to see them. Or maybe I didn't want to see them. I trusted her so much that I ignored every red flag waving right in front of me. And now, here I was, standing in my own house, with undeniable proof of her betrayal lying on the floor. After a while, I just couldn't take it anymore. I stormed back into the bedroom, and before I knew it, I was shouting. "What the hell is this?" I yelled, pointing to the condom still on the floor. She stirred, groggy and confused, barely aware of what was going on. She sat up, rubbing her eyes, looking at me like I was crazy. "What are you talking about?" she slurred, still half drunk. "That," I said, pointing again, my voice trembling with anger. "A condom fell out of your pants. How do you explain that?" Her eyes widened as the reality of what I was saying finally sank in. Instead of showing any guilt, she immediately got defensive. "How dare you accuse me of something like that?" she yelled, her voice suddenly filled with rage. "I would never cheat on you." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The proof was right there in front of us, yet she acted like I was the one in the wrong. Before I could say another word, she stumbled out of bed and came at me, fists flying. "You think I'd do something like that after all these years?" she screamed, her punches wild and clumsy. I grabbed her wrists, trying to keep her from hitting me, but she was furious, her face bright red with anger. "You're out of your mind!" she shouted, fighting to break free. "You don't know anything." It was like I had stepped into a nightmare. Here I was, standing in the middle of our bedroom, holding undeniable proof of her betrayal, and she was acting like the victim. Her punches were weak, more from drunken frustration than anything else, but the anger behind them was real. I tried to calm her down, but she was too far gone. "Calm down!" I yelled, trying to steady her. "Just look at what's on the floor. What is this? How do you explain it?" But she wasn't listening. She was too wrapped up in her own anger, too drunk to think straight. And then, in a split second, she broke free from my grip and bolted toward the kitchen. I didn't realize what she was doing until it was too late. She grabbed a knife. She stood there, gripping it in her trembling hand, eyes wild with rage. I could hardly believe what I was seeing. This wasn't the woman I married, the woman I'd spent years with, the one who always seemed so calm and in control. Now here she was, drunk, furious, and holding a knife like she was ready to do something reckless. "You don't get to accuse me!" she screamed, pointing the knife at me. Her hand was shaking, and her eyes were a mix of fear and fury. "You don't get to tell me what I did or didn't do!" For a moment I just stood there, frozen, trying to make sense of what was happening. How did it come to this? Minutes ago, I was holding a used condom, and now my wife was waving a knife at me. I took a slow step back, raising my hands to show her I wasn't trying to escalate things. "Put the knife down," I said as calmly as I could, though my voice was tight with anger. "Let's just talk. We can figure this out." But she wasn't hearing me. She was too far gone, emotions running wild. She took a shaky step toward me, still holding the knife up, her voice trembling with rage. "You don't know anything about me," she yelled. "You think you can just accuse me like that? You don't know what I've been through." I kept my distance, trying to stay calm, but inside, I was boiling with anger. This was way beyond anything I ever expected from her. I thought I knew her. I thought we had an understanding. But now this was something else entirely. It wasn't just about cheating anymore. It was about control, power, and how fast everything can unravel when trust is shattered. My heart was racing as I stood there, watching her, hands shaking, face twisted with emotion. She took another step toward me, and I knew I had to do something. I couldn't let this get worse. "Just put it down," I said again, this time more firmly. "You're not thinking straight." For a brief second, she hesitated. Her eyes flicked to the knife, and I saw a flash of doubt on her face. But then, just as quickly, the anger returned. She gripped the knife tighter, her knuckles white, and took another step closer. "You don't get to walk away from this!" she screamed. "You don't get to act like you're innocent in all of this!" I was done playing her game. I bent down and grabbed the condom off the floor, my anger finally reaching its peak. I held it up, waving it in front of her. "You're going to stand there and tell me I don't know anything?" I shouted, my voice raw with rage. "This fell out of your clothes. You can't explain this away." For a moment, the room went completely still. Her eyes locked onto the condom in my hand, and I saw the truth hit her like a freight train. The knife slipped from her grasp and clattered to the floor with a sharp metallic sound. She just stood there, staring at it, like the full weight of what she'd done had finally crashed down on her. Her face went pale, and I watched as she crumbled right in front of me. Tears welled up in her eyes, and her whole body started to shake as the reality set in. She sank to the floor, head in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she choked out between sobs. "It was the alcohol. It was a mistake." Her words were a jumbled mess, spilling out in a desperate attempt to explain or justify herself, but I wasn't buying it. I stood there, fists clenched, listening to her pathetic excuses. "You didn't mean for this to happen?" I repeated her words, my voice dripping with disgust. "You're blaming the alcohol? Your friends? That's your excuse?" She sobbed harder, shaking her head as if somehow she could undo all the damage she'd caused. "Please! I wasn't thinking. I was drunk. I didn't know what I was doing." I cut her off, my voice sharp and full of fury. "You didn't know what you were doing? You think that's supposed to make it better? You really think I'm just going to forgive you because you were drunk?" She kept crying, her body shaking as she crumbled into a pathetic heap on the floor. But I didn't care. Not anymore. Her tears meant nothing to me now. All the trust, the respect, everything we built together, it was gone. I stood there, fists clenched, trying to control the storm of anger brewing inside me. "You didn't just make a mistake," I said coldly, staring down at her. "You made a choice. You chose to go out, get drunk, and sleep with someone else. Don't sit there crying, acting like you're the victim. You did this." Her sobs grew louder as she rocked back and forth, mumbling apologies that meant nothing. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," she kept repeating, like saying it over and over would magically erase what she'd done. But it was far too late for that. There was no coming back from this. I couldn't stand being in the room with her anymore. Every second I stayed, the anger in me grew stronger. Without saying a word, I turned and walked out, heading straight to the closet. I yanked open the doors and started ripping her clothes off the hangers, throwing them onto the floor. Everything she owned, every piece of her life that had been mixed with mine, was suddenly tainted, and I wanted it out of my sight. I grabbed her favorite sweater, the one she always wore on our date nights, and without a second thought, I flung it out the window. It fluttered down onto the street below, a symbol of everything I was about to destroy. I wasn't thinking straight, but I didn't care. The betrayal was too fresh, too raw. She came stumbling into the room, her face still wet with tears, eyes wide with panic when she realized what I was doing. "What are you doing?" she screamed, rushing over to try and stop me. "You can't just throw my things out. This is insane." "Insane?" I shot back, my voice full of contempt. "What's insane is that you thought you could screw around behind my back and then come home like nothing happened." I kept pulling clothes from the closet, tossing them out the window one by one. Each item felt like a piece of her betrayal, and getting rid of them made me feel like I was taking control of something in the chaos she had created. "You've lost your mind," she yelled, grabbing at my arm, but I shrugged her off easily, my anger fueling me. "This won't fix anything." I spun around, glaring at her. "You think I'm trying to fix something?" I spat. "There's nothing to fix. You ruined it." I grabbed more clothes, more shoes, more memories of the life we once shared, and tossed them out too. With each item that hit the street below, I felt a twisted sense of liberation. But it was hollow. No matter how much I threw away, the betrayal still hung over me like a dark cloud. That's when she completely broke down. She collapsed onto the floor as I finished clearing out the closet. "Please stop," she begged, her voice barely more than a whisper. "We can work this out, we have to. We're married. We can't just end it like this." I looked at her, the woman I once loved, now reduced to a sobbing mess on the floor, and I felt nothing but disgust. "Forget it," I said coldly. "You really think I'm just going to pretend like none of this happened? That you didn't come home with a condom falling out of your pants? That you didn't pull a knife on me?" She reached for me, desperate, But I stepped back, not wanting her to touch me. "I love you," she cried, her words choked by sobs. "I didn't mean any of it, the knife, the shouting. I wasn't thinking. I don't know why I did it." "You love me?" I scoffed. "Is that what you call this? You didn't seem to love me when you were screwing some other guy." Her face crumpled as my words hit her, and she shook her head, trying to explain. "It wasn't like that," she stammered. "It was just one night, a mistake." "One night? One mistake?" I repeated bitterly, my anger flaring again. "You think I'm supposed to just forget that you cheated on me? That you tried to stab me in a drunken rage?" She looked up at me, her eyes wide with fear and desperation. "Please, we're married. You can't just throw me out like this." I pointed toward the door, my voice steady and resolute. "Get out. We're done." She shook her head, refusing to believe it. "You can't mean that. We've been together for so long. We can fix this, we have to." "I'm filing for divorce," I said firmly, leaving no room for argument. "And when it's over, I don't want to see you again. You've destroyed everything." For a moment, she just sat there, staring at me, her world falling apart right in front of her. Then, slowly, she stood up and walked to the door. She didn't look back. I watched her go, and when the door finally closed behind her, I felt this strange mix of relief and sadness. It was really over. The divorce went through quickly. We didn't have kids, and we didn't own much together, so there wasn't much to fight about. I kept the house, she moved out of town, and that was the last I ever saw of her. I didn't follow her life after that. Some mutual friends tried to fill me in on how she was doing, but I shut it down. I didn't want to know. It was over, and I had no interest in hearing about how she was moving on. I threw myself into my work, trying to forget everything. The house felt empty, but there was a certain freedom in that emptiness. I didn't have to look at her things, didn't have to pretend everything was fine. The silence was tough at first, but I drowned it out with the hum of my computer, the constant tapping of the keyboard. In time, it got easier. Looking back, the divorce was a turning point in my life. It forced me to rebuild everything from scratch, but I did it on my own terms. Sure, there were moments of bitterness, but those passed. I came out of it stronger, more focused, and much less willing to compromise on the things that really mattered to me. In the end, I learned that trust, once shattered, can't always be put back together. Sometimes, the only way forward is to let go completely. Life moves on, and so did I. Dear listeners, thank you for all your incredible support, and for tuning into my stories on YouTube. Your enthusiasm and feedback mean the world to me. Stay tuned for more exciting tales. Warm regards.